Okay. Okay. So good afternoon. Thank you everybody for joining us today in this press conference. My name is Tatiana Rodriguez Maldonado. I am the General Coordinator of Sensat Agua Viva. We are Friends of the Earth Colombia and also part of DCJ, Demand Climate Justice. Today we have three amazing speakers. I'm going to be the moderator. I'm going to name name you when I pass you the word. I'd like to begin with a very brief introduction about something that is concerning, that is very disappointing in these two first days of this COP29, and is the way that it was approved, the fully operationalization of carbon markets, because the way it had been doing sends an appalling message to the world. It's something that took a long time in the last COP to discuss, and we are really disappointed in how in one day it was just checked without discussion, in a lack of transparency process, and in a moment that we feel that it's undemocratic because it haven't take the time for the parties to discuss and to really understand what is going on and to participate. So if today someone is celebrating, it's not the indigenous peoples and the communities or the movements, it's the big polluters and maybe the governments of the global north, because they continue funnel money into wars, genocide, and fixes that will allow them to keep their extractive economy systems going on, but without delivering the urgent climate finance for the global south countries. So the big polluters may celebrate this as a success, and many people will argue that the carbon markets can provide the finance needed for a just energy transition and loss and damage in the global south, but it's not true. Carbon markets are not climate finance. This is a lie. This is a false solution. We are going to go deep in these issues today, but we need to understand that this basic and necessary debate has been avoided, and what we have today is the establishment of business conditions. Carbon markets are just that, business for some actors, but this is not climate finance. This is not money that's going to the countries to help and to support the communities that are really creating solutions in the territories for the climate crisis. This is just only creating and setting a stage for the business. That's all. So the real proven community-centered and cost-effective solution to justly address the climate crisis are increasingly being swept aside in favor of this industry basket, risky, expensive, and including false solutions all the time. I would like to say something about the COP16 in Cali that took place 2 weeks ago, because finally we've seen that something that we have pushed in the past is happening. We have pushed for the confluence of the biodiversity and climate agendas, but it seems that the only way that it is happening is through business, because the announcements that were made in Cali, in the CBD, regarding the unclear creation of funds, bonds, and credits point in the same direction. These are false solutions without a transparent and democratic construction, which only result in financing for industries and risk for communities, and at the end of the day, only lead to unresolved issues. It is very curious that in Cali, only the last 2 days were dedicated to discuss the finance. And it was, of course, not enough time to do that. So it stayed as unresolved issues. The main is that it is argued that in the absence of public funding, private investment is necessary. And in this way, the global north continues to evade its responsibility in the concrete delivery of resources to the global south because of the historical ecological depth and the urgency of addressing global climate crisis. So I would like to pass the word on the speakers today to go deep in some of these ideas. First of all, I would like to welcome Tom Goultot, the Director of Indigenous Environment Network, who's going to talk about carbon markets as the main fall solutions setting up in these COPs. So, Tom?
Thank you. I apologize for my voice, it's disappearing. Yeah, within our international indigenous organization, we work for the inherent and collective rights of indigenous peoples and the dignity of indigenous peoples throughout the world. We have 30 years of history fighting for environmental and economic justice and now climate justice. The elders who brought me into this work told me this is spiritual work that reaffirms our human relationship and responsibility to protect the sacredness of Mother Earth and the recognition of Father Sky. These are very fundamental relationships that we have in many of my travels visiting indigenous peoples throughout the world is our importance of our cosmovision. The unprecedented bypass of procedure at this COP29 demonstrates a desperate attempt to rush more carbon markets, offsets, and carbon dioxide removal technologies. Over 20 years of failed carbon markets have resulted in indigenous people's rights violations, land grabbing, and disproportionate impacts. I want to briefly talk about the fundamental flaws of Article 6. Climate change cannot be solved under a system that rewards growth, facilitates extraction, and refuses to support the rights of truly transformative environmental justice for indigenous peoples. These false solutions do not cut carbon emissions at source. Market-based approaches to reducing carbon emissions will continue to benefit the world's largest polluters while sidestepping critical actions to strategically phase out fossil fuels. Article 6 will provide a platform for engineered carbon dioxide removals, geoengineering, and other false solutions to expand. Article 6 fails to adequately secure and promote the rights of indigenous peoples as articulated in our United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and erodes to fully embrace indigenous peoples' sovereignty and inherent jurisprudence. We don't want to see this as a continuation of colonization towards a termination agenda of us as indigenous peoples. When something is commodified, it is only valued if it is profitable. Mother Earth is not a commodity. She is not for sale. We have only one Mother Earth. We must stand together in solidarity to protect her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And now I pass the word to Dylan Hamilton from the Alliance of Non-Governmental Radical Youth.
Thank you. We are facing an unprecedented challenge. Our task is not only to convince people and governments that the climate crisis is a severe threat to humanity, but also to then see through and prevent attempts to avoid real action in favor of profit-driven and technocratic solutions. We must call out these false solutions wherever we see them. One of these so-called solutions is carbon capture and storage. There is currently no evidence that these technologies can exist on a scale required to be a real solution, and it's possible that they never will. Despite this, parties continue to rely on and invest in CCS to make up for their lack of real, tangible action. The recent decision to push through carbon markets leaves the door wide open for carbon capture and storage. Furthermore, it leaves geoengineering as an option. This would have devastating implications for people and the planet and must never, ever be entertained as an option, let alone as some sort of solution. These inequitable solutions, like carbon capture and geoengineering, exclude the lived experiences, knowledge, and leadership of young people, especially in communities facing the worst impacts of the climate crisis, and who are now facing harm from the consequences of these false solutions. We need youth and Indigenous-centred, justice-driven strategies, not plans from a bygone era driven by myths of infinite economic growth. We must not allow mitigation strategies to replicate global inequity and systemic discrimination, the same systems that got us into this crisis in the first place. We especially must not allow genuine measures, climate finance in particular, to be co-opted by these projects that will not work and will only further harm the people already suffering the worst impacts. The solution is clear. Emissions of greenhouse gases must decrease. There will not be a magical technological solution that means we can continue our business as usual. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dylan. And the next speaker is Rachel Rose Jackson from Corporate Accountability and Kick Big Polluters Out campaign.
Thank you, Tatiana, and thank you everyone for taking the time to be here today. I think I often get asked, and perhaps most of us often get asked, well, how do you spot a false solution? How do we know if it's not real? And there are so many benchmarks that we can use to assess whether or not something that's being labeled as a solution is in fact a meaningful, equitable solution. To give one simple and very relevant example, over the past 2 decades, while carbon markets have been being used, has there been any meaningful and lasting reduction in global emissions? No? Well, then why are we gaveling them through in the opening plenary of the CMA? There are many different ways that we can assess the technicalities, the technologies, the risks of all of these schemes, but there is even a more basic test that we can apply to any scheme, proposal, policy, or pathway that's being put forward as a so-called solution to the crisis, and that is trace it to the source. Spoiler alert, if the proposal on the table is being backed by the very actors who have literally fueled the climate crisis and profited hundreds of billions of dollars off of doing so, all while knowing for more than half a century that they were condemning people and the planet, then very simply put, it is not a solution. It will not respect Indigenous rights and the rights of local communities. It will not keep 1.5 alive. It will not keep fossil fuels in the ground or reduce emissions. Simply put, it will not work. So even though there is a plethora of ways, and we've heard from some of my esteemed colleagues, how we can debunk and disprove these schemes, these risky technologies, the irrationality of these false solutions is really even more basic than that. It is entirely illogical when you look at it from a bird's eye view that to place our lives and the very planet that we live on the line to them. The same polluters and actors or governments who have caused the climate crisis and are failing time and time again to address it. These big polluters are worried only about one thing, and that's saving their profit, and they do not care about the cost. They do not care about the cost. And that is why they think nothing of profiting billions of dollars off directly fueling the ongoing genocide of the people of Palestine. This is why they think nothing of robbing Indigenous peoples of their lands in pursuit of greed. And this is why they think nothing of this planet that is our only and precious home. Yet, they are welcome here. Not only are these big polluters welcome at the UNFCCC, but we quite literally roll out the red, or maybe in this case green, carpet for them. Last year, COP29 in Dubai had a record number of fossil fuel lobbyists. More than 2,400 fossil fuel lobbyists descended upon these talks. This is the second year in a row where we are having a fossil fuel presidency, And the governments from the global north, like the US and the EU, who have an outsized role in this talks and are historically the largest obstructors, are also the largest historical emitters. We're waiting for the Kick Big Polluters Out Coalition to analyze the list of participants for this COP, and we'll know soon exactly how many fossil fuel lobbyists are here. But we also saw new research from Oil Change International today that exposed that there is a commitment of almost $250 billion in oil and gas infrastructure currently being approved. These schemes that are going alongside this expenditure and this expansion are not real solutions. Yet, it doesn't have to be this way. There are real, proven solutions at the ready. They are cost-effective, they reduce emissions, they respect rights of Indigenous peoples, of local communities, of Mother Earth, and they make the world a better place while doing so. I often get asked, well, then what are they? And I have some answers. These are not my ideas, they're crowdsourced from many of our colleagues, but just to drive the point home, here is a list of just some examples of real and proven solutions. We could drastically target the excessive and wasteful consumption of corporates and wealthy elites. We could reduce absolute levels of energy use and overall consumption across richer parts of the world's population. We could plan for and transform energy systems away from corporate-controlled fossil fuels and to empower people-led renewable energy sources. We could create an immediate moratorium on all new fossil fuel extractions and develop agreements for equitable, rapidly managed phase-out of fossil fuels. We could end producer subsidies for fossil fuels and redirect those subsidies, as well as subsidies to fall solutions, to real people-led community solutions. We can respect the ecological integrity of natural ecosystems, secure land and tenure rights for Indigenous peoples and communities, rapidly transform industrial agriculture towards agroecology practices. We can create public investment schemes for retrofitting inefficient housing and set new standards for high-efficiency cooling in houses around the world. Invest in public transport that's free and electric, make cities car-free, or ensure major public investments in electric trains. The list goes on and on and on, as many of us here can attest to today. These solutions are real, they're people-led, they're proven, and they work. But we need the money to be redirected away and the time to stop being wasted on false solutions, and finally and forever invest in these real solutions before it really is too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel and Dylan and Tom. We have like 10 minutes. If someone has to something to ask or to add, please can you give us your name and then the question?
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm a journalist. We've had 3 NDCs come in so far out of almost 200. What are you going to be looking out for to decide if they're any good or not? Thank you.
I didn't understand clearly, did you?
Thank you for the question. I'm sure others may also want to weigh in, but some big things we'd be looking out for are commitments to set a clear, soon date for phasing out fossil fuels equitably, fast, fair, and forever. We'll be looking for a lack of reliance on offsets, CCS, geoengineering, and other supposedly emissions-reducing technologies, aka false solutions, to reach emission reduction targets from countries from the global north, such as the UK, countries in the EU and the US. We would be looking to see that they're finally paying their climate debt and making commitments to provide the meaningful public community-controlled finance that is long overdue to address the climate crisis. And we'd be looking for commitments to actively do no harm, make reparations, and repair harm in all aspects of climate action. I'm not sure if anyone else would want to add to anything. Yeah.
Someone else has a question? So, would you like to add something? Tom.
in reference to the question about NDCs, the indigenous peoples that we are working with, both in the north, especially in the Arctic region, and our indigenous people, relatives, brothers and sisters in the global south. They're very concerned with the escalation of unpredictable weather events. They're concerned with the continuation of the expansion of fossil fuel development. We are part of the Banking on Climate Chaos with other NGOs like Oil Change International, Rainforest Action Network, Bank Track, and we have annual reports. But it's alarming when we look at the facts of increased investment in fossil fuel development since 2015, the Paris Accord, to the tune of, I think, around $6.7 trillion. That's a lot of money. And when our people ask questions that we are dying, we are being forced to try to adapt, especially our people from a melting ice culture. And we look at the NDCs, we look at even the governments that some of us come from in the north, where there's expansion of oil refinery. When we question them, they say, well, we're going carbon neutral. We are offsetting our pollution. They are greenwashing. So these false solutions we talked about, carbon markets, carbon offsets, even nature-based solutions, etc., they allow the fossil fuel companies to continue to expand, and that they're going to be able to use their NDCs to manipulate mathematics to show that they have cut their emissions when in reality they have not cut emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. We have another question here.
Thank you. I have a question for Dylan. You mentioned geoengineering and carbon capture and storage. Could you say a little bit more about these technologies and what they entail?
Yeah, so these are essentially representative of the idea that governments have that they can continue to emit as much as possible. So geoengineering, one example is solar radiation management, which is essentially literally limiting how much sunlight reaches the planet, which, if we get it wrong, obviously has devastating consequences where it is not an exaggeration to say that everything dies. So that's obviously something we really want to avoid. And even under the precautionary principle, it's been determined that this is far, far too risky. Nevertheless, governments still keep it as an option because it would mean that they could continue to emit unabated. It would mean they wouldn't have to restrict pollution from the big polluters. And we see a lot of campaigning in these spaces for these technologies to stay on the table. And if we don't make sure that our agreements, especially on things like carbon markets, are rigid, then we are leaving these options on the table that would be absolutely disastrous. Yeah.
We have just 4 minutes. I don't know if you want to make some final remarks in 30 seconds.
Thank you. On geoengineering, we have consulted with our spiritual knowledge holders. If you look at the UNFCCC embracing bringing knowledge holders, the factors are meeting today, all day, and they end on Friday. We don't want to see this as a manipulation or a contradiction when we ask our elders and knowledge holders to come here. Geoengineering, we're talking about solar radiation manipulation, management, so-called management, stratospheric spraying in the stratosphere particles to deflect sunlight. We have people like the Sami, the reindeer people, that very concerned. They stopped an experiment in their homeland in Sweden because they said there's no proof that spraying the particles in the stratosphere would not hurt their lichen that the reindeer feed upon. So we're very concerned about the experimentation of these technologies corrupting the sacredness of our relationship with Mother Earth. Thank you.
I would just reiterate that we've largely, in a way, won the narrative on climate change. Most people agree now that it is a severe threat. When you hear what governments say, especially during the World Leaders Summit, it sounds convincing. It sounds like they're taking it seriously and that they know the consequences if they get it wrong. So now our challenge is we have to look at the detail. We have to notice these false solutions, and it's very difficult. But the more people who are aware of that and reading things critically, the better. So, yeah.
Thank you. I would just add one thing. Actually, when Tom started his intervention by apologizing for having lost his voice, it really struck me, because we shouldn't have to come here and scream year after year after year until we cannot speak, until our voices do not work, reminding people that this is not working, that outside these halls the reality is very real, that lives are being lost, that nature is being destroyed, emissions are soaring, fossil fuels is expanding. These things are so basic, and yet in these halls we make them so convoluted and so complicated. So I think I would just add for a plea to return back to basics, back to truth, back to what we can see with our eyes and know in our hearts, that the way that we're currently responding to this crisis in these halls is not working, and that the only way forward is to follow the example of frontline communities, people in the Global South, youth and Indigenous peoples, to embrace real solutions, to invest in them, to give our all. Truly responding to this global crisis demands nothing less than turning our eyes away from everything that has led to here, fossil fuels, big polluters, global north extraction and their false solutions, and finally, readily embracing the real solutions that we know we urgently need. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And I would only say that these schemes only perpetuate the neocolonial patterns of extractivism that have been historically present in the Global South. And we don't have time to keep believing in false solutions. Thank you very much.